Natasha. Now it's my pleasure to call on Michael Frankel, Professor of Neurology from Emory, to talk about the stroke registries. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got the wrong...
I can try and do an impersonation if you like.
I apologize. I'm sorry. I have an old schedule. I'm sorry. We're now going to talk... Nigel Hughes, I apologize, is going to be talking to us next. Thank you, Nigel.
Good morning, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me to speak today. Talking about public-private partnerships, driving forces for innovative treatments and research policies, and I work for Janssen, part of Johnson & Johnson in research and development as a scientific director. So what I'm going to cover today is some programs around public-private partnerships in the EU. We'll pass over the irony of someone from the United Kingdom talking about Europe at the moment. And briefly a bit about the National Institutes of Health Accelerating Medicines Partnership, but I think hopefully in the time allotted, what have we learned, what have we achieved, what is our legacy, some take-home messages from some of the public-private partnerships. I speak from outside of the resuscitation community, I think as was mentioned at the top of the day, but I do want to echo what James was saying earlier, and this will be a significant theme and has been throughout the whole day, I think already, about collaboration. So we'll pick up on that, I hope, in this talk. Just to briefly mention, this is a bit more than $10 million. This is the Innovative Medicines Initiative, IMI, that was set up by the European Union, so across the European Union states, 28, to accelerate access to innovative therapies for EU citizens. And IMI 1, started in 2008, was €3 billion, split between the European Union, funded in cash, and then the FPA, which is European Federation for Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, but it's actually the pharmaceutical industry, which would provide a similar amount of resource in kind, so people, technology, time, and so forth. It's quite a unique public-private partnership. It's probably one of the largest in the world. And IMI 2, actually, was started in 2014, is even slightly larger than €3 billion and is moving a number of programs on. And it works across all disease areas, all sorts of projects and programs, from diagnostics to therapeutics, from data and so forth. The one that I'm working on myself quite closely is EMIF, the European Medical Information Framework. This is 58 partners across 14 countries, €56 million over 5 years, and we're now in year 4 of 5, so we're getting close. Keep it brief because of time, but there are 3 objectives to this program. One is a platform, a technology and governance framework, which is being developed to allow researchers to identify, access, assess, and then use or reuse health data from disparate sources, whether that's from electronic health-related data sources, cohort data, population sources, registries, payers, and so forth. Quite an undertaking. It's also being supported by 2 disease foci, one in metabolic, so obesity, diabetes and so forth, and one in Alzheimer's, and both are tasked with developing early biomarkers in the earlier stages or prodromal stages of these diseases using the EMIF principle or process, and have already been working on a number of publications and research outcomes in the translational space supported by the EMIF program. And it's very much a population and cohort data-driven, life cycle-driven program across all of these all these partners and states within Europe. Importantly, also, I think it's not specific to AD or to metabolic. After the 5 years, there's supposed to be a sustainable platform where there will be this legacy platform to enable research in many other disease areas using all these types of different data sources with one common data platform. Also streamlining other aspects like contracting, for instance, interaction around ethics committees and so forth, all trying to be streamlined, because as we all know, it can take a month of Sundays just to try and do that even with one partner, let alone with multiple partners across geographies. And we are not the United States of Europe, sadly at the moment, certainly just the United States of Europe, and it's quite challenging to do this on different member states and different approaches and processes. Another program is the EHR for CR, the Electronic Health Record for Clinical Research Initiative, which is finished now as an IMI project, is now in its sustainable scaling phase. Effectively, what we're trying to do here is create the digital plumbing, if I can call it that, between hospitals and hospital networks within Europe to enable access to their hospital records under the right conditions, of course, legal, ethical, privacy, and so forth, to support clinical development. So what could happen in the coming months, actually, but certainly in the next years, is if you wanted to, in silico, for instance, evaluate your clinical trial protocol, your inclusion-exclusion criteria, and so forth, you could do that by accessing the hospital network, measuring it against or checking it against the hospital records for specific patient groups that have been identified in your protocol, and then accelerating, hopefully, the speed in which you can actually get to the study sites and so forth without having to do this in reality and then finding, for instance, that your inclusion-exclusion criteria are so narrow you get very few patients to enrolment. And actually, enrolment of clinical studies is one of the key drivers, actually, to uptake of drugs in the market. So EHR for CR is at the moment sponsored by a number of pharmaceutical companies working with their own clinical networks where they volunteered in collaboration with the hospitals to drive an exclusive or non-exclusive network of hospitals which they can work with to develop this program. I'm not so familiar with this myself, but have spoken to colleagues around the National Institutes of Health Accelerating Medicines Partnership here in the US. You probably see on the bottom there that it's broken down into Alzheimer's and type 2 diabetes, similar to EMIF in some respects, rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, considerable amount of funding in the millions, but really developing knowledge portals in which we can capture genotypic and phenotypic data for translational research. It's 5-year programs, started in 2014, and these are in the ascendance, really, in terms of developing these knowledge portals and bringing together collaborations from academia, clinical, and in industry. What we learned from these programs? Well, what a surprise. It's not about data. It's really not about technology. It's about people. And aligning agendas is critical to success. This is really challenging. It's a bit like herding cats. Cats can be herded. You just have to have the right incentives. You definitely need a quid pro quo between stakeholders, and it's really important to map stakeholder needs at the start of all of these types of programs, which invariably doesn't happen. But unless you understand the agendas, which you may not actually realize or may not be that obvious, you can't necessarily converge them. And a surprise, overall project management of large-scale programs is extremely critical. It's paramount to success. A federation of data sources with harmonization is a necessary foundation, so access. So we're not accessing, like in EMIF and the EHR for CR, data directly. We do it through a federated remote process. And importantly, if you forget anything else that I say today, I think there's only one thing to remember. There's only 2 types of data to worry about: data you own and data you don't own. And it's the data you don't own that's the challenge. And for industry, real-world data is data we don't generate. We generate things like RCT or randomized clinical trial data. There's a technology solution for most problems, for what's good enough, which I think echoes a comment said earlier. And do not underestimate the time taken and required in these programs. It's a long latency in terms of developing real-world data programs going forward. And lastly, just because of time, what have we achieved? Well, we certainly have a pretty competitive collaboration of industry partners now, which was not really seen in years before. We have alignment of industry with academia, R&D for mutual scientific outputs, harmonization of relevant data sources and potential portals for future work. And ultimately, we've striven to achieve innovation in translational biological research, incorporating the phenotype and genotypic insights for biomarker and therapeutic target development and developing chronic diseases concerning chronic diseases for our society. But most importantly, I think we've opened industry and academia to collaboration models and recognition that the future of therapeutic R&D cannot be conducted in isolation. And if you can't see this, you can't see well, you can't see it at all now. The cartoon was, the guy was saying, well, thank you. I'm worried that healthcare has become too impersonal, Doc. And the doc says, nonsense, just relax and lie back on the barcode scanner. So I'll leave it at that, but I think this is about phenotypic cohorts. It's about generating populations that we can study, and we need to do that in a collaborative and federated manner. Thank you.